Hello there, my name is Magnus Mazimaka. I am asking, have you ever had the time to reflect on the fact that over the past 2 years of the pandemic, we had an enabler or players in the industry who have enabled us to survive the pandemic? We're talking about assisting or playing a role where government, individual, lifestyle, businesses to thrive. We're talking about telecom companies that have made our life not only easy but able. And we are looking at how these telecom companies have played a critical role of enabling us to survive the pandemic. I would love to have a conversation with the CEO of MTN, Madam Mitwa. Someone can reflect and see what has been happening and what role the company has played and where we're headed to, but also challenges, lessons learned, and the way forward. Let's go have a conversation with Madam Mitwa and see what she has in mind. 2 years to be in the pandemic?
Yeah.
Okay, globally the pandemic has been 2 years already.
Yeah.
Because it started sometime in November 2019, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you find yourself in the same problem.
Yeah.
And the question is how other companies have managed to deal with it.
Yeah.
Make sure that the company doesn't close, doesn't make losses, doesn't fire people.
Yeah.
Stress is there, but you stand out.
Yeah.
But we actually had to make it. And this is what MTN has tried to do.
Right.
But not only that, you even facilitated other economies, other sectors
Right.
to survive.
Right.
As actually you've been seen as an enabler, both on the side of government and the private sector and personal life.
Right.
How to survive the pandemic. The question is yours going to be from the leadership point of view and
Yeah.
philosophy of the institution. How did you turn around
Yeah.
to position yourself to the extent that you served the three purposes,
Yeah.
of the public sector, private sector, and
Yeah.
individuals?
You know, it's funny you ask me now, and it's only now that I'm reflecting on the how. But when we were going through it, it was really just a case of wanting to be present in all those areas, you know. I remember when the pandemic first hit, it was around March last year. First thing that comes to your mind is our people. You know, we have 300 people who work for MTN. So first things first is how do we make sure that the people that serve our 6 million plus customers are, number one, protected, and number two, able to continue to serve 50% of our workforce, because the other 50% is frontline, facing customers, serving customers, etc. And as you can imagine, on that day in March when the lockdown was announced, you know, sheer panic across the board. You know, what's going to happen? Are we still going to work? Are we not? And as a leader, you'll find that in periods like this is when you really have to stand tall, right? So, you know, keep calm, you know, we're with you, I will direct you, and very quickly now started building things like rotational schedules into the service centers, into the office. We won't have the full staff complement. We're going to have maybe a 50% or 30% staff complement, and this is the schedule that you're going to run in order so that we can continue serving customers. So P1 for us was really in the people space, and it's only now that you ask me the question that I really think about it. At that time, it was just about doing.
Yeah,
you know,
you didn't have a script.
No, there was no script. I mean, none of us have lived through a pandemic ever.
Or what to do.
But listen, also our customers are affected. You know, the fact
How
that
do you deal with an affected person?
we have the individual consumer and we have corporates, you know, and just as a corporate is a corporate, MTN is a corporate as well. So what are the priorities for us right now? And in that space, of course, things like maintaining connectivity, P1, things like cost efficiencies, all of a sudden, overnight became of paramount importance. So we started approaching a lot of our corporates as well in terms of what are your priorities right now? How can we make sure that you're connected still through the pandemic? And, you know, we talk about business impact. Normally, from the perspective of individual consumers, but corporates as well. I mean, they came forward and said, look, we're shutting down branches in area ABCD, so can you suspend my service? What does that suspension mean? Does that mean you're not going to charge? Are you not? And those things we had to navigate, and in knowing that we're all experiencing this pandemic together, we were very quick to waive certain fees for certain customers in the corporate space.
That was not in the structure of your business?
No, never. We had never thought about, if a customer wants to shut down a branch temporarily, what does that mean? You know, but we had to be very open to the suggestion, because at the end of the day, just as we are affected as a corporate, our corporate clients were affected as well. Then when you come to individuals, so many examples as well. And it was interesting to see how overnight, people who were used to being mobile, used to being served by internet connections in the office or physically in class in school, overnight you now have to learn and work from home. And the way we typically invest in telco, we invest to such a tune that at any given time we must at minimum maintain a level of 25% headroom. You know, so we have our network capacity, utilization should be about 75%, so 25% headroom in case of anything.
But mostly people usually sleep when they're in the residential.
Exactly. This time
it was both
full on
day and night.
So this 25% headroom that we had, you find in certain areas, you know, yes, some areas consume that 5%, so now you have 0% headroom, but in some areas traffic grew by 50%, 75%, 100%, completely consuming that headroom. And we had planned investments throughout the course of 2020 in any case, but what we had to do now, very quickly pivot all those projects that we said we would take our time to run through the course of 2020, now deploy multiple teams so we can crash the timelines around those projects, which was also interesting because you have field engineers who are saying, right, we need to roll out, accelerate the rollout of network, but at the same time, they're saying, well, you do understand that there's COVID-19 as a pandemic that's out there, right? So the balance, right, so the balance between wanting to accelerate project execution in order to serve our customers, but also at the same time balancing the safety of the teams. If you're to ask me as a leader, what was the biggest dilemma during COVID-19, it would be this. Recognizing that we are an essential service and therefore we must continue serving, but also acknowledging that the people who you're asking to serve are human beings too, you know? So that was the interesting dynamic on the customer side. And then, of course, apart from network and connectivity, which was P1 for us, then came the whole discussion around cashless, which, by the way, was an agenda item for all of us even before the pandemic, right? And I think Rwanda, compared to a lot of other countries where I've worked and lived, we are blessed to have an entire system that is talking and driving the story of cashless. Then COVID hit, and it's a discussion around how can we use cashless as a vehicle to limit the level of transmission of the disease. Now, this is something we had never thought of before. For us, cashless was about productivity, efficiency, but now you're thinking of it in the context of safety, health. It's actually something that can help reduce transmission. That was a whole new ball game altogether. And that's why when the central bank put us together.
Having this conversation alone, okay,
Central Bank put us together as an industry, so not only us, but as MTN, but also other players in the telco space, the banks as well, put us around the table to say, how is it that we can encourage people to use, digital payments or digital methods of financial services a whole lot more. Enter now the intervention around zero rating of transaction fees. That was in March 2020.
And the first time as an executive, you're tested to offer a service without returns.
Really it was. And it was an interesting one because, of course, as a provider or as a service provider, you always want to find ways and means to make affordability much better for consumers, right? But I think the fact that we all came together as an industry and did it together at the same time, I think is where the biggest impact was felt. So for mobile money, and maybe that's where you're talking about the disruption of the economy and things like that. And I'm sure Chantal, when you met her, would have talked about it a lot as well. But mobile money during that period, we saw person-to-person transactions grow almost 8 times, something that we've never seen just by virtue of us making transactions free, which shows you as well that the appetite for digital solutions for financial services is there. definitely there, and it's not a question of literacy, because we've seen the transaction volumes grow before. The potential is definitely there. And anyway, fast forward 90 days, these transactions were zero rated. The number of customers who were using mobile money went up by about 20%. Transactions grew almost 8 times. The number of merchants who are now actively asking for MomoPay codes, which was an issue before in terms of getting them to onboard, now actively saying, give us the solution. And I think the fear at the time of reinstating the first batch of fees back in June last year was that people are going to drop the service completely, but they didn't.
The demand was...
The number of customers who were onboarded during that period of free transactions didn't necessarily change when the fees were reinstated. So a lot of the growth that we're talking about financially from mobile money and digital financial services really, were recovered, number one, and number two, can really be seen to catapult at that point of reinstatement of fees after the zero rating period. So that's customers, that's network, and then now let's talk community, right? In the community space as well, so we've settled our people. They're all working well from home or protected in the service centers or in the field. We've done our most to keep customers connected, contributed through zero rating of transactions. Then we take a step back and say, all these things are great, but let's talk about the people who are helping the country fight the pandemic. You know, the likes of the RBC, the Ministry of Health, and all of those. So in that space, you know, we have this MTN Foundation, which typically receives 1% of our profits every year, guaranteed, for community project investments. And typically those investments would be around youth empowerment, women empowerment, and education, and any other priorities of the time. And, you know, we had these funds out of the foundation say, how is it that we can contribute? It may be small, but it will make a difference. So you'd have seen us, you know, coming forward and donating things like masks, PPE, which typically we would never have thought of in the previous life of MTN Foundation outside of a pandemic. But not only that, we try to see what is it that we have in our strengths that we can use to support the cause of fighting the pandemic. And you would have seen around March, maybe going into April, things like zero rating calls among the COVID task force is something that we also did. We didn't talk about it much because for us it was more a contribution to the fight against COVID, not necessarily a commercial drive. So doctors, nurses who were part of that COVID-19 task force, they were calling each other for free. You know, there was a point in time also, there was a spot testing in the streets where people from RBC needed tablets or phones that had an application. So we made that data free to encourage things like purchases from e-commerce sites. All right, so where are the e-commerce sites? Let's have a chat with Ministry of Trade. Let's have a chat with Ministry of ICT. Can we know who all those e-commerce sites are so we can zero? So nobody has to go to the market. They can go to kimironko.rw or to vuba.
Each other.
So
who would begin the conversation for MTN to step in?
Right.
Would you like internally think about it, identify what challenge they are facing, and you propose to them, or they would come to you?
In this particular discussion, we had a chat with Ministry of Trade initially to try and understand what is it that the SMEs are facing as a challenge, very uniquely given this COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, and the one challenge was naturally the pivot from physical sales to now online sales. How do they get visible, and how do they get traffic onto their e-commerce sites? Then the thinking from an MTN perspective is, well, from our perspective, what we're able to do based on our strengths is zero rate traffic to your sites. And with that, we can also maybe promote them using our channels and things like that. And there was a good list of about 40 e-commerce sites that we had zero rated access to for a good 6 months. So things like that, born out of conversation, is what we also pursued to support our community in general. It's been an interesting 2 years.
What a journey.
It has been.
But you, before we go into other technical things about your business, as an individual, you find yourself in the middle of a pandemic, and you're the leader. And you have no excuse looking back and hiding your face. You have to confront it. The commander of the field.
Right.
When you recall, because the pandemic is still there, but it's softer than before. What were those hard moments that made you even start wondering whether you're actually going to be
able to
lead?
Yeah. I don't think as a leader during the pandemic you had the luxury to think you cannot. That luxury was not there at all. And I talk about it now very casually, but in the midst of the panic, in the midst of the chaos, I always liken leadership in situations like that to leadership of pilots, you know. When there's
stress points,
when there's turbulence that a plane is going through, have you noticed how every time the pilot comes on, their voice is calm?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that the pilot is not concerned about the turbulence. They are, but they have to show up for the passengers of the plane.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a plane going through turbulence and the pilot comes on and he's sheer panic? Oh my God, I don't know what we're going to do. What are the passengers going to do? They're going to jump out, parachute out and things like that. We're dead. So for me, it has never been a question of, one, I need to be, irrespective of how I personally feel, and the pandemic is the pandemic. We all had certain fears. Irrespective of how I'm feeling, I have to show up, give that sense of confidence and calm to everybody, and also be very open to the fact that it's a pandemic that no one has experienced. So I might not have all the answers.
But also positively.
Yeah.
You reached the point where you discovered, I think I got some strength.
Yeah, no, definitely. So
I can handle this.
Yeah, and it's only in this conversation now that you look back and you wonder, oh, so how did I do it?
Actually.
And in looking back, you say, no, I actually can. You know, I think a lot of leaders, myself included, realize that we're capable of so much more than we ever thought was possible before this last 2 years. I always tell my team, who have teams reporting into them, that as a leader, your team will only ever run as fast as you, right?
Yeah.
And when there's doubt, when there's uncertainty, when there's fear, you're the one who has to keep that energy level up. And you're human, yes, but if you're tired, please take a nap. But tomorrow morning, you have to be up and you have to continue running because the team is always looking up to you, you know? Yeah.
What did you identify that there is a difference between the structures and the strength of the institution and the team?
Yeah.
You know, you have these traditional structures built in the institution to handle X, Y, Z, pandemic pressure, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then you have the team.
Yeah.
Either in terms of skill set, leadership,
yeah,
you know, cultural values, you know, all that
yeah,
kind of stuff. What did you learn during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, the strengths that we have as a team and as an organization were reinforced, but also our vulnerabilities exposed.
Wow.
You know, and strengths.
The cracks, the strength, everything.
Exactly. Very crystal clearly. And where I say your strengths are, you know, reinforced is in the sense of, by nature, in our culture at MTN, we tend not to be very hierarchical. Okay, I've tried to create an environment and encourage my team to create an environment where super flat, my office door is open, so I expect leaders to be the same across the entire organization. And when you're hit in an environment of a pandemic where information needs to move extremely quickly, or answers need to be given, or questions asked very, very quickly and without them leaving to fester overnight, you find that that kind of environment lends itself as a strength to help you keep the business going. Also, in terms of strengths, you'd find the fact that we are, number one, an ICT company, and number two, had already started experimenting with digital solutions, remote working, and things like that. It was very easy to very quickly pivot from one working style to another. But on the flip side, you'd find areas where you probably were planning to improve upon, but didn't necessarily get the time to do so, now become an emergency. And that's what I'm talking about, informal vulnerabilities. You know? Yeah.
Those hang in there.
Exactly.
Before you get to know that
exactly.
This is actually a big mistake.
I'll give you a very small example. Contract management in the legal department. Okay? Contract management, we were an ICT company leading digital. That's what we claim our ethos is. Contract management for the longest time had still been manual, was still physically signing contracts, you know, and we knew that, you know, as an evolution path, we are going to digitize, we're going to have digital signatures. I mean, this is default. But when the pandemic hit, from one day to the next, it was digitized.
And you had no choice.
We had no choice. So there are a lot of areas like that where, you know, the things that you were kicking down the can.
Giving an excuse.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You can't,
not at all. Yeah. So strengths were reinforced, vulnerabilities also exposed and made more visible for us to deal with more urgently.
Capacity-wise, like you're talking about skills, I like this because usually you can have an institution with all the resources, everything, but there are certain skill sets that are required at a particular time. Yeah. Especially when you have big problems and difficulties like the pandemic. Yeah. What did you learn about the traditional training, you know, programs or recruitment and the skill set that but this time you said, hey, wait a minute. Yeah. There's something you will actually need. Yeah. Possibly even the market not provide. Yeah. I think interestingly for us, the biggest skill required of any organization in this pandemic has been that of digital. Wow. Right? The ability to transition from physical to online. And by virtue of us being an ICT company, a lot of our programs were structured in that fashion, even before the pandemic. I think it validated the emphasis and investments that we made in our people in that regard. But of course, you can never be too comfortable. So there are certain areas, for example, whether it's, cybersecurity, information security, which of course were of value before the pandemic, but the importance was extremely magnified. Yeah. So I would pull out maybe those more specific type roles that have become more important in the face of remote work. But as far as people in the back. Exactly. But as far as digital skills are concerned and all of that, I don't think so. But things like information security, cybersecurity, anti-money laundering to monitor mobile money, things like that, those ones became a whole lot more front and center. Yeah. Yeah. These are the kind of people who traditionally like in the background. Yeah. Now they're like front and center. They're front and center. Yeah. Wow. Now let's talk about this interesting shift. Yeah. The pandemic brings a digital transaction, digital payments, everything, and then you find yourself, this is actually a very serious investment, requires us to expand, to be affluent, to have serious investment, you have skills, you have everything. It's big stuff. Then all of a sudden you separate it. Yeah. That was a quite interesting philosophy for traditional investments, big companies like conglomerates. Yes. To chop companies and create portfolios. Right. It takes quite some time. Yeah. You will have shareholders pulling and pushing. Yeah. Telling you, wait, you know what is this? But overnight, you are separating the two companies. Right. Where did the philosophy come from? Right. And what motivated the first, because it was done in the fastest period possible. Yeah. Give us the thinking behind that. Well, as you know, MTN Rwanda is part of a group of companies where 21 operations across Africa and the Middle East. Now, at an MTN group, from an MTN group perspective, they've always toyed with the idea of creating a fintech company that runs at its own pace. Because the traditional structure of telco for a startup business like fintech sometimes can hinder the rate at which it progresses and evolves. Then on top of that, you also have, in most of our markets, including Rwanda, you have different regulatory bodies of a of the business, because when fintech was born, there wasn't necessarily an in-between regulator, as an example. So you'd find the traditional telco regulator regulates MTN as a business, but the issuing of licenses to conduct financial services is issued by the central bank. Okay. Now, from a governance perspective, it does make the lines bit gray, and for us to provide that further clarity as to which entity is regulated by which, we also saw, the opportunity to separate the two companies. And you also see from a shareholder and investment interest perspective, you have some people who are extremely interested in financial services and the future of financial services, but not necessarily traditional telco. So we also foresee that separating mobile money is potentially going to unlock a certain level of shareholder value that was not seen before. And to be honest, I think
like I made the first point around the agility, rapid pace of innovation, I think separating the company under its own CEO, different style of thinking, startup mentality, could really increase the rate of pace of development for mobile money. So between these three things, rate of agility, innovation, speed to market, regulation, and the potential to unlock value is where the thinking really began for the separation of mobile money as a subsidiary.
Is it traditional across the MTN group?
It is. It
so
is.
It's not you.
It's not only Rwanda. No, it's not only Rwanda. It's not only Rwanda. Yeah.
Maybe you should have this opportunity to clear out, I think, either misconception
Yeah.
or whatever, something out there.
Yeah.
People are saying you did this to minimize the value of shareholding.
I heard that. I heard that.
Because they said if you're making good returns
Yeah.
in mobile money,
Yeah.
if you chop it and take it away as a separate entity,
Yes.
you're minimizing
The value.
the value.
Right. I heard that, and it was an interesting conversation and something that hadn't crossed our minds at all as a potential concern for shareholders. Because, when we listed directly on the stock exchange, that was in May, all the shareholders who were in the books of MTN had shareholding over the full company, of which mobile money was and still is a part. So the separation of mobile money as a subsidiary doesn't mean that they lose the shareholding that they had in mobile money when it was a function within the business.
Okay.
Even if, for instance, tomorrow there was maybe a conversation around structurally separating it completely, the commitment from MTN Group across all the operations is that shareholders would never be worse off, because at the time that they were subscribing to MTN, mobile money was a part. So there would be definitely considerations, if at all the story evolved into separating mobile money completely, there would definitely be considerations from a shareholding perspective.
I guess people who had those concerns.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So on the mobile money and the digital transactions,
Yeah.
we are in Africa where we have a very serious problem.
Yeah.
Global platforms locked us out.
In what sense?
For example, if you do, let's say, I don't want to mention certain brands,
Yeah.
some of them,
Yeah.
you can't receive money, for example, if you're in Rwanda,
Right.
but you can send money.
Right.
And that makes us on this side of the world
Yeah.
excluded.
Right.
In the world where you are still seeing big companies maintaining a financial exclusion,
Yeah.
it's a big problem, because the
Yeah.
philosophy of global citizens, that's
Yeah.
right there.
Exactly.
So from the investment perspective of the mobile money Rwanda,
Yeah.
do you see you developing your platform to the extent that anybody in the world,
Yeah.
without being excluded geographically or whatever,
Yeah.
that they can use the platform both ways,
Right.
sending, receiving,
Right.
paying, and all that kind of stuff?
That's a really interesting question. Remittance is one of the business areas that I think remains quite underdeveloped, to your point. I think what MTN...
And it has so many people.
Yeah, what MTN Mobile Money Rwanda Limited has matured in over the last few years has been person-to-person transactions locally, withdrawals, payments for utilities, merchant payments. But what we do see as a huge opportunity to provide value to customers is in increasing the number of corridors that we have with countries outside of Rwanda. So we took the time this year to really understand what role we play in international remittance, and we found that our share of the remittance business, both inbound and outbound, is roughly about 20%. Now, this doesn't necessarily speak to the number of people who are actively using mobile money, which is more than 50% of our customer base. So somewhere it seems that people who have mobile money in their accounts, when they think of sending money internationally, still take the money out of their account and find alternative means to send.
Oh, yes.
And for us, going into next year, one of the main focus areas is to make sure that those corridors or countries where our customers would like to send money or receive, we actually unlock. And we've gone on a massive partnership drive through MTN Group, leveraging our footprint, that's number one, but also seeking out other aggregators, whether it's World Remit, people like Tunes, who already have those connectivities in different countries, to make sure the same way you're able to send money to someone here in Rwanda or receive money from someone here in Rwanda, you can do the same outside as well. So it's a big play also for next year.
Wow. So this whole year, there's something like, I think is going to be like your legacy.
Right.
The Connect Rwanda.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what to ask, but
yeah,
it's an incredible project.
It is, yeah.
You've worked so hard, you've
been
championed, you've been out there.
Yeah.
I think...
Not embarrassed to ask.
And I think when you travel in the countryside, I guess your name is even known like a politician.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Apart from the brand.
Yeah.
And how you've championed this. For any brand that I know in the world,
yeah,
that produces a product or has a service, never seen something like this.
Yeah.
That you wake up in the morning and you decide to freely hand out a product worth hundreds of thousands, either both economic reason and social reason.
Yeah,
reason.
yeah.
How did you come up with this and why?
I remember when I just came into the country in 2019, I got here around October, and I remember meeting with Honorable Minister Paula for the very first time. You know how it is, you're a new CEO, you come into a country and you want to understand what the priorities of the sector are. And listening to her, it was really interesting to see how the priorities or the challenges that she wanted to have addressed within the industry really married or mirrored some of the priorities that we ourselves had within MTN. But in that conversation, she spoke very prominently about access, and access in the form of affordability of internet services, access in the form of literacy, but even more importantly, access in the form of the tools that people can use to access infrastructure that we are all rolling out. And it really got us thinking to say, over the last 5 years, as MTN or even as an industry, we've trialed various different things, from trying to bring in smartphones, period, from trying to bring in smartphones at a low cost. At the time, MTN was selling a very entry-level smartphone at 20,000, then there's another one at 30,000. But none of these initiatives had really made its major mark on smartphone penetration, which at the time was actually quite considerably low. A smartphone penetration of less than 20% implies that there's only 1 out of 5 people or 2 out of 10 who actually have a smartphone walking the streets of Rwanda. And while for us, from a business perspective, it only naturally makes sense that we drive smartphone penetration, as an African in an African country, it almost felt like, no, we have to do something and we have to try something different. So I had thrown the challenge to the team to say, can you think about something different? What is it that we can do to experiment, to test and see? And the idea then came up to say, and actually Connect Rwanda in its final form wasn't Connect Rwanda in its initial form. Initially, the thinking was that we have 1.2 million people who are on the MTN Rwanda network. And the thinking was, can you imagine if each of those 1.2 million people just bought a smartphone for somebody else? They had. These 1.2 million people had smartphones. So we said the Magnuses of this world who are in this 1.2 million, can we just ask them just to buy one? That was the plan initially. Can we just ask them each to buy one for somebody else? Overnight, we'll move from 1.2 million to 2.4. Then when we had the discussion with the ministry, this is what we were thinking, then the discussion became much bigger and much broader to say, but why are we only talking to individuals? We can talk to corporates, we can talk to private institutions, we can talk to public institutions. Let's make it much bigger than that. And we're trying to figure out how do we create a buzz around it. Yes, how do we create a buzz around it? And somebody came up with the idea to say, there was this ice bucket challenge, I don't know if you remember, of 2014, yeah? And at that time, the challenge was to raise awareness for the disease ALS. And when you read the history, in a space of, I think, 6 months, they had raised like $250 million. We're like, wow, if we could raise even 10% of that, it would make a huge difference. And that's how Connect Rwanda was born. And we're so happy that the Ministry of ICT also really jumped on it, ran with it like their own as well. And that's what for me made the success. The fact that it was...
Now, you use the word success.
Yeah. I think we launched in December of 2019, and the dream at the time was that we must hit 1 million smartphones. That was the dream. 3 months into the campaign, there were more than 44,000 pledges, which was fantastic. Then the pandemic hit. you know. So if I'm honest, you know, I think the stride and the pace and the growth trajectory of Connect Rwanda as we saw it in the first quarter of 2020 was slowed down. But notwithstanding that, when people ask me about whether Connect Rwanda was successful or not, I say 100% yes, because today there are more than 20,000 people who have received smartphones and are actively using them more than they were 2 years ago. And apart from the impact that I see in these 20,000+ lives, is also proof to all of us in the private and public sector and as individuals, the power of unifying behind a common goal. So if we could do that in the space of 3 months, there's no telling as to what more we can do if we see a societal problem or challenge opportunity. Hands together, more without a doubt, because Connect Rwanda has shown it, it is possible to resolve. So this is the enterprise team. So when I was talking about support for corporates, large, medium, homes as well, which was a new business stream that we kicked off last year, this is the team that handles that.
They are COVID heroes.
They are. See, not me, it's him who's saying.
Yeah, they made us survive.
Yeah.
Talking about the comparison between from 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. Now people are going to some other G that we don't know.
Right.
You have invested a lot into improving 3G connectivity.
Right.
And yet we already know that there's massive investment into 4G in the country, like almost more than 90% coverage.
Yeah.
Why deplete the resources? Why not find a way where if there is an investment, same way you have banks that don't want to invest into telecoms, but they need telecoms to deliver.
Right.
Why wouldn't you have a conversation with 4G investors so that you can use the same network instead of getting the resources to invest in improving your 3G connectivity?
Right. So I think two questions in one that I'm hearing. The first question is, why are we still investing in 2G and 3G as an example? The requirement to invest in 2G and 3G in Rwanda is still very much there for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't currently have 100% population coverage, okay? And traditionally, the areas that are not covered right now, at minimum, must have 2G and 3G. So you'll see when we're entering new areas of the country, we traditionally roll out 2G and 3G first. But on top of that, when we talk about smartphones, in as much as right now in Rwanda, or in MTN Rwanda, we have more than 1.2 million people who are actively using smartphones, the number of 2G and 3G only devices among those is still very high. Okay, so more than 50% of the smartphones on our network only support 2G and 3G. 4G devices, they're coming up, and they're coming up quite well, but the reality is that not all the smartphones on our network support 4G. So there'll still be a requirement to invest in 2G and 3G.
Now, so this is by default, it's not by plan.
It's by default. I mean, by nature of the customers that we serve and the tools that they have to access the network, there is still a requirement to invest in 2G and 3G. And that's why when we start talking the conversation around smartphone, it's not just about smartphone, but it's also about the higher technology smartphone. How can we, through Connect Rwanda or device financing or whatever the case may be, how can we also shift focus to make sure more 4G and higher technology smartphones come into the country? That's what can lessen the investments on 2G and 3G. But that doesn't, underestimate the requirement to evolve technologies, because the reality is technologies like 2G and 3G tend to be a little bit less efficient than higher technologies like 4G, 5G and above. That's why technologies evolve. Yeah. And from that perspective, as you know, the market structure is that we have this wholesale provider in place who has invested quite significantly in 4G, and we make use of that network. When I say we, on behalf of our customers, we make use of that network. It's a model that works relatively well. They can access it, no particular issue. It's just that the model is a bit different from other markets. Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes,
Is this something MTN is thinking about?
definitely.
I mean,
Yeah.
How could you not?
It's definitely an area that we're thinking about in the context of big data and the wealth of data that we've built over the last 23 years. And we think about that wealth of data in the context of how is it that data can make us more intelligent in the way we serve customers, predict when a customer is going to have an issue and maybe address it beforehand, or put the power to self-serve in customers' hands more so than them having to come to the store or call the call center. So a lot of experimentation you'll see in that regard going into next year as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
As you take us out,
Yeah.
Where do you see MTN before you leave, or when you're still
Why
here?
are you talking about me leaving?
I mean, you're possibly going to be the president. So you can't be president now.
Yeah.
You have to take you somewhere.
Yeah.
What do you think? Where do you see the farm of the company in the coming years?
Yeah.
In a country and an environment that embraces technology as an enabler of economic transformation.
Yeah. For us, we have been, are, and will always be a connectivity solutions provider. That is our core. But where I see us evolving into, beyond conversations around my network quality is not that great, or I'm experiencing drop calls, going into next year, really want that to be a story of the past. And the reason why I'm so emphatic about that is that for as long as we're still focused on the basics, it robs us of the time to innovate. So going into next year with the connectivity piece really settled, our challenge is to explore applications, platforms that our customers can find value in riding off of the connectivity that we've built. I'll give you a very classic example. Mobile money in Rwanda did not exist 10 years ago.
It's a new product.
It's a new product, but it cannot be the beginning and the end. There's so many other use cases, platforms, innovations that can be born out of ICT companies like ourselves, and that's where the emphasis is going to be. Last year, we experimented with Ayoba, which was the messaging app, which would still like to see grow in leaps and bounds beyond just messaging. Would like it to build it into a marketplace, a super app and things like that. So emphasis around apps, platforms is the sphere in which MTN would also like to start playing beyond mobile money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
That's serious diversification.
Yeah. No, definitely. And but to do that, I think the great opportunity, especially here in Rwanda, is in partnering with already existing or up and coming members of the ecosystem, because there's so many young, great people that I've met who have
You have access to the
great ideas around. So being able to respond to those changing dynamics is one of the things that we poise ourselves for.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I feel like it was too short, but anyway, that's what happens when we don't see each other for so long. It feels like it's been 2 years.